before we get into the swing of things, there might be some people trickling in. But as I do the presentation tonight, please, if you have any questions as I'm going, you can put them into the Q&A box on the webinar, and we will get to them at the end of the presentation. So that's the best place to do it. We won't talk about them in the middle of the presentation, but we will definitely have time for it at the end. So direct your questions there. And then other than that, we will just get started. And if anyone joins, then great. So hi, everyone. My name is Heather. I am a college counselor, and I've also worked in admissions at a top 10 university and read applications in the UC system. So I'm very familiar with this process. And today we're going to talk about extracurriculars and the parts of the application that are not your academics or your essays. So to get started, if any of you were present at Jen's presentation earlier in this webinar series, this slide might be familiar and a little bit of a review, but those of you who are new, this is a breakdown of sort of what goes into a college application. And just to note, this is an estimate and it will be different for every school and every student. If you're a top athlete, obviously this will look different. So this is sort of a generalization of what goes into a college application, but these are the main components. And as you can see, about a quarter of your application is your extracurricular activities and your involvement. So that's a huge chunk of what these colleges are seeing about you. And that's where we can really build out your interest and your passion and really show who you are outside of just the numbers and grades and then the one sort of personal statement, big essay you get to write. In terms of picking extracurriculars, we'll start with sort of the in-school activities, the clubs, the things you do at Pali or another school that you're attending. And this is sort of the bread and butter of a lot of people's activities because it's so readily available and it's open to all the students at the school, and there's all these different options. But a lot of students, I think, get to these big activities fairs, as this picture shows on my slide, and it can be really overwhelming. There's so many options. They don't know sort of what to do with their time, where to go, what sounds interesting. And so a couple questions to ask yourself when you're thinking about these in-school activities. First is, does it help tell your story and show your passion? Now, this might seem obvious, but I think the main thing here is that if you are someone who is interested in journalism and ultimately thinking you might want to apply to journalism in college, then you should be on the school newspaper if it's offered to you. If you're someone who's really interested in economics and you have a business club at your school, or something of the like, or a DECA, which is something a lot of schools have. It's a business competition. If there's DECA, like, you want to be showing those activities that relate to the eventual major that you're hoping to apply to. It sort of shows that passion and sort of certifies that you actually were interested in that and didn't just throw it on at the last minute. So that's sort of the first question to ask yourself. But I also get a lot of students who say, well, I don't know what I want to study, or I don't know what I'm passionate about. So then how do I know what to do? And the biggest thing here that students sort of overlook is that the best thing to be doing is trying things and to get out there and explore even the tiniest seed of an interest that you have. So if you're not sure what you want to study, then this is the time, especially early on in high school, to be trying things. And you can still tell that story later on by showing sort of the progression, showing, this, I started out thinking I was interested in this, and then it led me to this other thing that I thought I was interested in. And then I really discovered that this part of it was what I was excited about, and it led me here. So you can still show that story and tell that experience to a college, but you have to be getting out there and trying something in order to do that. Another thing to focus on here is that the biggest thing that colleges are going to be looking at is not just what you were involved in, but how you were involved in it. So they're looking at your impact, your leadership, your growth within an organization. And that doesn't just mean titles of leadership. It doesn't just mean I was president or, secretary or whatever that is. It really means, how did you impact that group? If you just showed up to meetings and listened to others, then that's not going to show your a big impact that you made. And even if you weren't president, did you come up with a new idea for an event? Did you coordinate a specific initiative? Did you innovate in some way, or add extra work to that organization that you were involved in? So if something is, I know Jen uses this example a lot, if you're in French club and all you do is show up to French club every day and eat French food, then that's not really going to show the college much about you. But if you took the time to coordinate French lessons with other students, or to tutor French students after school, or to bring French club to a French restaurant, and you had this whole new idea, those are the kinds of things you're going to ultimately want to talk about on your application down the line. So those are the kinds of involvements that you're going to want to think about when you sort of choose these activities. And then the last thing is, do you see yourself sustaining that involvement? Obviously, being involved in something for longer in high school is going to be, it's going to show more about you and show more dedication. You don't have to be in every club all 4 years. Obviously, as I mentioned earlier, if you're not sure what you want to do, you can show that progression. But if it's something that you're really not excited about and you're just sort of signing up because you think it'll help you get into college, that will show in not only your sustained involvement, because you probably won't stick to it, but also it'll show in that lack of community impact. If you're not as excited about it, you're not as passionate about it, you're not going to really dig in deeper to that activity. The next sort of bigger category, bigger chunk here, is volunteer work, which can be a really great part of your application if you can show your dedication and any volunteer work that you did. But the first point is that the best volunteer work is personal, meaning that if you are someone, incorporating those interests that you used in your clubs also into your volunteer work. So if you're someone who is interested in music, then volunteering at an elderly facility to play music for the residents, or a lot of hospitals in the LA area have opportunities where you can play at the hospital to patients and sort of brighten moods and get involved in that way. And if you're interested in sports, volunteering to teach sports lessons to younger students, or to, run a drive for sports equipment for the sport that you're interested in, to help those that can't afford the equipment, really tying your volunteer work to your actual, to your interests and passions, and incorporating it into that story that we're talking about. And similarly here, you really want to focus on finding ways to be a leader and an innovator. A lot of kids, when I've read applications or heard them talk about their volunteer work, they focus a lot on what the organization is doing. But what we want to know as readers is what you have done for that cause, not what the organization has done. So, you not just signing up to attend drives or fundraisers or whatever it may be, but actually coming up with new ideas, finding ways to help with the mission, reaching out to your coordinator and asking what is something that you wish you could do that you're not doing right now, and how can I help you get there? Creating a new event to raise money for a cause that you're passionate about. These are the kinds of things that really show that leadership and that innovation and that creativity that these schools are looking for. And, again, with the sustained involvement, even if you're not doing this volunteer work all the time, even if it's, once a month or something like that, continuing to work with one or two organizations that you're really passionate about, rather than jumping around and doing, 3 hours here, 4 hours here, 2 hours here is going to be more impressive. And it's really showing, again, even if it's once a month, even if it's every quarter, but if you're going back to the same organizations that you've actually created a connection to, and you've shown that that passion for, that's going to show more about you than just, I, signed up to do this 1 4-hour thing one weekend, and then the next time I signed up for something else, and then I signed up for something else. So that's where you can really make volunteer work a big impact on your application, and sort of tie it into the rest of the story that you're telling through the other parts of the application. So we're going to talk about jobs and internships. This is obviously a great way to get involved, to try different career paths. But one thing I like to note for people, especially on the jobs aspect of this, which I think is it's a common misconception, is that for paid work for a job in high school, the truth of the matter is, the less glamorous is actually more impressive. So for students who, got a job at the, bagging groceries at the grocery store, or working at, a restaurant or something like that in the service industry, the dedication and responsibility and maturity that shows is going to be impressive. That you've, worked in a hard working environment, and you were mature enough to handle that responsibility, and you showed up every day, and you did the work. That shows a lot about you, especially as a high schooler, because not a lot of kids can take on that responsibility. On the other hand, something oftentimes a lot of students want to do is, oh, well, I got a job from my parents or my family friends or whoever is a connection for you, working at an office, marketing, looking at a lawyer's office, whatever it may be. And that is great if you really are engaged in it. But if you're just sort of getting that job and then sitting on the side and filing papers, and there's not much expected of you, if you're, answering the phones once in a while, you're not really engaging in that opportunity, then that's not going to show much, even if you've had sort of the title of the job on your resume. Again, everything comes back to sort of what you can talk about that you did for that organization. There are these active verbs, which we'll talk more about on, when we get to the sort of summary of everything, but sort of what you were able to contribute to that activity. Similarly for internships, I've had a lot of students who get internships at offices, and like I said, they sort of sit around, they answer the phones, they file, all of that. But what you can really be doing in these internships is reaching out to your supervisors and finding projects that you can talk about in your application that are exciting or that are newer, that you were able to have an impact on, whether it's a research project or a new organizational project, showing something that you were able to come up with that would help, or that you were able to learn from. One great reason to get into jobs and internships, especially paying work, is that supervisors of those types of activities are really great for writing letters of recommendation down the line. Oftentimes, a lot of schools will have required recommendations from teachers, maybe one or two. They oftentimes will have a recommendation from a school counselor, and then they'll allow you to send in additional letters of rec. And those can be from a coach if you're an athlete, or a drama teacher if you're interested in theater. But one thing that can be is a supervisor at a job, someone that knows you in a capacity outside of school, that is not your family member or family friend, but someone that, an objective third party that knows you from an activity outside of school, that can speak to who you are as a person and how you interact with others. That can be really valuable. So just one thing to keep in mind. Please? Sorry. The next big thing, so obviously summer programs are a huge part and a huge time that you get to be involved in activities. And One of the biggest things that to be doing during the summer is exploring interests that you can't explore during the school year. So as I mentioned at the beginning, you want to be picking activities that sort of tell your story. Now, with summer programs, if you're interested in, say, business, but there isn't a business course at your school, or there isn't one that you've taken as a freshman or sophomore, summer is the perfect opportunity to take that class, to take something in business, to really dive into that interest that you may not have had as much experience with in school. It's similarly, if you're someone who's interested in neuroscience and or something specific like that, pre-med, things that you're not necessarily able to really dive into at the high school level, then colleges are going to expect that you've done that over the summer, because that's really the time that you get to explore that. So don't sort of find yourself in senior year and say, I want to be a doctor, but you've never really engaged and found out, like, what does that look like? How have I engaged in that activity while I've been in high school? Now, a note on some of the sort of, most universities at this point, big, large universities, offer some version of summer classes that you can take, that high school students can take, either on campus or online. Some of them offer school credit, some of them do not, but a lot of programs sort of have these options for students these days. However, something to keep in mind about a lot of these is, unless it is doing what I just mentioned before, of like exploring an interest that you are not able to explore in high school, these programs are not necessarily as impressive if they're not as selective. Things that are sort of available to anyone who can apply and afford it, to be quite candid, are not going to really show, for the top universities, are not going to show that impressive nature of having done that over the summer. So, programs where you can travel and that are really expensive, and sort of, anyone who can afford that tuition can go have this experience. That is great. A lot of kids really do benefit from those programs, but just keep in mind that that doesn't necessarily show anything particularly impressive about the student down the line. However, the caveat there is sort of what I mentioned before, of if it's something that you are really interested in that you haven't had an experience with, then absolutely go take a class in it. Whether it's, at Harvard or summer program, or even just here at UCLA or something where you can take a class in that subject that you eventually think you might be interested in. Summer is also a really great time to be doing self-directed projects. If you're interested in film, summer is the time that you should be out there making films. We had a whole presentation on film applications and theater applications last week, but these days we are so lucky to have a lot of resources at our fingertips. If you can take your cell phone and make a short film, then the summer is a really good time to be engaging in stuff like that you may not have time for during the academic year, when you're bogged down with school and tests and everything else. If you're interested in art, summer is a good time to do sort of a longer art project where you are really showing how you can manage your time independently and have independent motivation, where you are doing something for the love of it rather than because someone was telling you to. But you need to be able to keep yourself accountable. So if you're excited about that prospect of doing, independent research, or doing a journalistic project where you want to write a feature on something, or you want to do a short film, or whatever that may be, if you're the kind of person that can keep yourself accountable and really make sure that at the end of the day you have something to show for that time, then that is very, that can be really impressive. That can show that self-motivation and that dedication and time management. If you're not that student and you're not going to be able to sort of keep yourself accountable and focused, then something more structured is going to be more beneficial, something where you can listen, and really have the structure of a program. A big note here about summer programs specifically is you really need to start your research early. A lot of the most selective programs, their applications close December, January, February, those application deadlines far earlier than we sometimes think about. So if you're looking at those top schools and you want to be going after some of these really competitive, either paid internships or paid research programs, or a lot of these very selective summer programs, you want to be starting your research in the winter and not wait all the way until spring, because by spring a lot of that is already sort of past. So just something to keep in mind. Now, another part of these activities is notable accomplishments and awards and things like that. And one way to sort of develop this side of things, because I think a lot of students don't really think to engage in this, other than the few awards that are maybe given out at your school, or National Merit Scholar, or things that people are sort of familiar with. But you can find a lot of opportunities to sort of build up these notable accomplishments outside of school. For example, there's student writing competitions and student film festivals and pitch competitions that are all opportunities that you can sort of show your skill. And if you're a student, if you're interested in film and you enter the student section of a film festival, and your film gets selected and it plays, and maybe it gets an audience award, even if it doesn't get an award, even just being selected for a film festival sort of certifies the skill that you are claiming to have on your application. And it's not out of the reviewers it's not always sort of judgmental in any way. It's that we've got all these students who are interested in these things, but if you can look to specific accomplishments or a third party sort of certifying, like, yes, they have, one, engaged in this thing, and two, they've shown promise, they've shown potential, and they've shown the initiative to even apply, that can be very impressive. So, like I said, there's a lot of writing competitions, especially for writing. There's a lot of competitions that include scholarships. So if you're interested in merit scholarships or scholarships not necessarily based on financial need, then there's a lot of essay competitions and writing competitions, and they both show your writing ability on your application, but also get you a little bit of money towards college. And they're not often huge amounts. Some of them are, but there's those little bits that sort of add up over time. So if you're someone who's really interested in writing and that's sort of how you spend some of your free time, is entering these small competitions, then that's great. And a lot of these things are actually easier to win than you might think, which is sort of funny. But there are smaller sort of film festivals or art festivals or art competitions that don't get that many submissions. So throw an application in, throw an art project in, and you might sort of get that not only award, but also potentially some scholarship money towards college. So that's a nice sort of thing to sort of round out your application. And one other thing that this shows is that not only that you had sort of the skill, but that you were willing to share your work, which sounds sort of rudimentary, but a lot of students who are writing or singing or doing whatever at the high school level don't have that ability to share their work and get feedback and be open to criticism and being open to learning. That shows a lot of maturity. And if you're going into an English college level English that class and you're going to do creative writing, you need to be ready to receive and give feedback, and really hear criticism of your work and be able to take that in and work on it and grow from it. And entering competitions like that shows that you have that skill because you were willing to put yourself out there and get feedback. So just something to think about. Now, at the end of the day, this is what we're looking at. You're going to get a piece of paper on the common application that is all of your extracurriculars and work experience. And you get 10 slots and you get 150 characters plus 50 more to just say the position and the name of the organization. But you get 150 characters and it all boils down to that. So it's kind of intimidating because this is explaining so much of what you did over 4 years. And it's a lot to boil down into these little explanations. But the way to make it easier is, as I mentioned, to have those active, very tangible things that you can point to that you did. And that can really show the most impact here. Not, I was part of this club, but I started I started a new initiative. I recruited 50 members. Numbers are great. So things, data points that you can point to. I recruited 50 new members. I raised $10,000, whatever it is, having really specific, tangible things that you can point to that sort of describe your impact. That's what's going to make this extracurricular activities sheet have the most weight on your application. And obviously, at the end of the day, it's quality over quantity. So you don't have to be filling that full 10 slots that they allot you. You might want to get closer. You don't want to necessarily just have 1 or 2 and then sort of not be able to think of anything else. But at the end, you want to focus on 3 or 4 really solid activities that you've shown a really big engagement to. And then, maybe a few other things that are smaller or more just temporary, whether it was a couple weeks in the summer or things like that. But having a few at least that are you've shown great engagement, you've had leadership. And again, the leadership can be sort of official titles, if president or things like that. Does not have to be. It can be that you were really passionate about one area of the club, so you sort of took over that, even if it was, unwritten. So sort of having that leadership and having that community impact is ultimately what's going to make this sort of stand out for you. And I obviously I'm talking a lot about sort of the younger students, hopefully, who have time to sort of add this to your activities. But even for older students, even seniors at this point, it's a little bit later in terms of adding activities. But the thing to be focusing on at that point when you are a senior is how to write this activities list. And that is, again, sort of talking about that strong verbs and focusing on your impact. Spend as little time as possible explaining the organization. Though if it's something that people will not be familiar with, you do need to sort of give them something to know. The number of times I've had students write acronyms and then not given what the acronym was to something that I was not familiar with, couldn't tell you. So definitely explain it to the point where someone not familiar would know what it is, but then really focus on how you impacted it, what you were able to add to that organization. So that's sort of the bulk of my presentation. Obviously, we can do some Q&A. If you have any questions, you can put them in the Q&A portion of the chat now, and I'm free to answer any questions.
Heather, someone asked on the college application, how do you count the hours for the activity? Do you count driving time? How do colleges look at the number of hours per activity?
Great question. So these are going to be estimates. They don't expect that you have like every hour sort of logged down. So it's okay to estimate a little bit. I would say that driving time and travel time, I guess for like a travel sport, it might sort of be incorporated into that. But if it's, just driving to a club, I wouldn't necessarily include travel time. Um, but you still do want to sort of be giving an accurate picture of how much time was spent. So if you think that's been a really significant portion of it, then I don't see what's wrong with that. Hope that answers your question.
Okay, great. And then we have another question that says, do you have any advice for kids that do sports? How can they squeeze in some varied extracurricular activities?
Also a great question. So one thing that has been uh, a new sort of development throughout this pandemic and COVID and everything moving online is that there's one benefit is that there's actually a lot more opportunities that are remote and things where you don't have to be traveling to different activities or necessarily even be on someone else's schedule. So there are university classes that you can take where it's asynchronous and you don't have to like be in the meetings all the time, but you sort of do it at your own pace and at your own time, and you can still take a college class. So things like that, where you can sort of do it at your own pace and squeezing it into those different hours might be a good option for someone who's an athlete and at practice all the time. Again, also with athletes, summers would be really important. I don't know the season that you're playing, so maybe summer is your big season or training time or whatever. But that can be an opportunity to really do some things outside of the sport and sort of adding some more to that. But again, also the activities, volunteer work or other activities can really relate to that sport and sort of feed into it rather than being totally separate. So if you can, help others on your team or volunteer for the lower level team at your sport, it can sort of mold together, which is a way to also save time.
Okay, great. And then another question is, my son is a junior now. If he hasn't done a lot of community service yet, does it look insincere to start now?
So I would say that community service doesn't have to be a big part of everyone's application. For some kids, it is going to be a huge part of what they do because that's what they're passionate about, that they've started it early, they're involved in certain organizations. If your kid is not someone who's been super involved in community service, that is okay. Not every single kid is going to be the community service kid. That being said, the one way to sort of make it not feel insincere, if you are going to sort of start something, if you're a junior, you've got a little time, you've got plenty of time to sort of add activities. Junior year is the year that you're sort of really in the mix of all this college stuff. But the best way to make it seem that authentic is to relate it to other activities that you've done, even if it's a club you're already doing, and then you add a community service element to that club. That can sort of add the sincerity, or sort of build off of what you've already been doing.
Thank you. The next question says, same question for music. Senior centers are not as practical right now due to COVID.
Sorry, so the same question with, sorry, can you repeat the other one they were maybe referring to?
Let's see here.
I
I'm not
just
sure what
ideas
they're referring
for
to.
how to fit in activities for music. Yes, I totally agree. Senior centers and hospitals and things like that are not as practical right now. There are some opportunities that you can do remotely. If you do research into that, you can Google search and find organizations that are doing similar things that you would do at a hospital or an elderly center, but just remotely. So that's one option. But also you can be teaching classes, or even if you find a few neighborhood kids that you are, if they want to learn an instrument that you're really good at, you can do instructions, you can start your own little music business. And it can also be remote. It doesn't have to be in person. If you're comfortable with in person, that's fine. But I've seen a lot of students who will start giving lessons, whether volunteering to give lessons or charging and starting their own sort of business for themselves. You can also be obviously engaging in whatever music opportunities there are at Pally or whatever school you attend, or just sort of that innovative part of what I mentioned, of coming up with places to perform or places to volunteer, and using that skill. Part of what's so impressive on some of these applications is the way that students are able to use their skills to and find ways to incorporate it into other things that they do. I also mentioned, the notable accomplishments. So there are, competitions and things you can be entering that, so you're still playing your sport or your instrument, but that's sort of an added element, or that you can add on top of it.
Thanks. Thank you. The next question is, what extracurriculars are impressive for someone who wants to go into the medical field?
So there's a lot of different things that you can do. It really depends on sort of your situation, but there are plenty of sort of shadowing opportunities, internship opportunities. I know Stanford Hospital does like a ton of very selective internships in different areas of the hospital, that you can get involved in. There's also research projects. There's like independent research mentorships, especially the summer after junior year before senior year. There's often research that you can do that, in biology or neuroscience, that is related to the medical field. There's like biomedical engineering. There's lots of different ways that you can get involved in that. I know UCSB specifically has a sort of research mentorship program, and there's a couple other ones that have things like that as well. And yeah, and then there's also a lot of just like those university classes that I mentioned at schools. They have courses, they have that you can take in different pre-med majors and things like that. So that's an example where a lot of the stuff is going to be at universities or colleges, and taking those classes is meaningful because that's not something that you can do at school. So that would be sort of where I would direct you on that.
Okay, great. Thanks, Heather. Are there any other questions?
I see a couple in the chat. Are those
One's a duplicate.
Okay.
And then the other one is about having access to a recording of this webinar, which we will send out to all the
We
participants.
will absolutely send a recording to everyone. Okay, well, if there are no other questions, you can always feel free to book a 30-minute free consultation with our owner, Jen Kafish. She offers that as just a free resource to students who want to, talk more specifically about their student situation. You can also talk to the Pali College Center. They have a ton of, ideas and resources of that can help you sort of build this out. Pali obviously offers a ton of activities, so definitely get involved. But yeah, if you have no other questions, thank you for joining us tonight.
Great, thanks, Heather. I'll send a link to everyone too with our resources page with all the activities and resources that we have on our website.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, we have a recommended extracurriculars resource on our website, and you can sort of scroll through. There's ways to filter based on kind of activity, so that, yeah, we will send that out as well.